Hi ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Ma Celeste, and today I'm going to be doing a video more about ancient Egypt Kemet, the Ankh, and the pyramid. Now I know a lot of people have heard so much about this stuff, and I think it was a really interesting video to go ahead and talk about. So when I talk about ancient Egypt, I usually like to refer to them as Kemet, and Kemet is, something that's associated with Egypt. But realize when we think about ancient Egypt, we must realize one thing. When we think about them, they always have a lot of natural gold within their society, and therefore they had uh, a lot of nice fancy jewelries that was associated, or headdresses associated with gold. So by understanding that, we can understand that when something has an abundance of gold there, we can know two things about it. One, that there were natural alchemists there that knew how to turn or make gold, and then also there was probably associated with immortals, because immortals are the ones that can do that. Once again, this is kind of letting us know that in Egypt that we had immortals and immortals ruling. So Egypt was a very powerful location where it was kind of known as a center of knowledge. So understanding that, and then also understanding that Kemet, or ancient Egypt, was a place that was associated in very high occultist powers and magic. So a lot of times when people think about Kemet, they always refer to Kemet as its historical facts and figures, and which is great, but a lot of times we must realize that they were primarily focused on a lot of magical occult systems. So when you think of the tombs being buried, that's like a ritual. When you think of their mummies, that's a ritual. When you think about them, the pharaohs all having their priests, they were very concentrated in the spiritual traditions that were connected with it. The afterlife and the tombs, those are all certain types of rituals. And when we realize and decode that, realize that they're very highly powerful magicians in their society. And understanding that, it will give us a better understanding when we look at something like, let's say, the pyramids. Because in modern day, Egyptologists would say that the pyramids is where the pharaohs would live in their tombs. And that is correct. Yes, they had their tombs, and that's where they would go to go on into their passings. And yes, they had many compounds and many pyramids around them, where the queen would have a smaller compound or a pyramid, where there would be different other structures around, where the wealthy, which is called the Mustafas, would actually have their locations in there. And basically that's saying if you were to pass and you gave money and you actually got buried with the pharaoh, it was a high honor. So a lot of times that those were what all those pyramids were there for. But primarily what the main purpose of the pyramids is usually to keep the energies balanced, because you have to understand that Kemet was really into magic, high magic, alchemy, and therefore they were really sensitive to energy. So one of the things that they were sensitive to is if you're visiting, let's just say, from a neighboring country like Greece, they would usually have the Greece people bath about 10 times. Actually, ancient Egypt, they used to bath like 5 times a day, but they would have the Greece fast, which basically means not eat, for 10 times prior to coming, and meditate, because they were very cautious about the thoughts, which is energy, cautious about the energy that they were bringing to their society, and that was a prerequisite. And the reason they did that is, once again, they're very sensitive to energy and into the spiritual ramifications of people's thoughts and energy. And because they would do this, they would usually bath 5 times a day. They're very cleansy, and they would connect with the water elements. So when you realize this, you realize that the pyramids was one of the things that would help keep their energy focused, because the pyramids are usually built on the earth grid systems, which would make the Egyptians actually connect with earth. And at the same time, it will keep it aligned with the cosmic alliance of the constellations. So what that basically illustrates is it helps them connect with the higher forces, but then at the same time it helps them connect with the lower forces. So therefore there's a yin and yang between the higher and the lower, and therefore there's a connection, because they would bath, which was connected with and do rituals, which is connected to water. They would be focused on the grid system, which is connected to earth, and they line up with the cosmos, which helps them connect with the fifth element. But at the same time they would also praise Ra. And what do I mean when I say that they would connect with the fifth element? Well, the fifth element is associated with spirit, which is also associated with consciousness. So a lot of times what that meant is they wanted to make sure our consciousness was vibrating at a certain frequency, because we cannot access the fifth element if our frequency or our consciousness goes below. Now there are some different type of plant spirits or origins that can do this too, who can connect to the fifth element, but human consciousness is one way to do it. So by keeping the consciousness of the grids on a higher frequency, it was able to help us maintain our fifth element. So therefore we have all fifth elements activated, and therefore we get more power. Also, what a lot of Egyptians would do is they would go ahead and migrate around the pyramids a couple of times. And what they would do by getting that is they're getting energy from the pyramids, which will go into their body. And if they had an Ankh, it would actually go into the Ankh. So now the next question is, what exactly is an Ankh? Well, if you know how an Ankh looks like, I have actually a bracelet. It looks like this. And basically, as you can see, you can definitely see that there's a circle and then there is a cross. And basically what that circle represents means eternal life. And the cross on the bottom of it basically represents the human body, or the terrain, or the physical plane. So what happens is or the life on the material plane. So what happens when you have the Ankh, which the circle is eternal life, and the cross means the life on the physical plane, you kind of connect the two together. And eternal life basically means immortality, or immortality life. And what it does is kind of like an antenna. So if you would hold it, it would kind of pull into energy, which would come into the Ankh and then come into you. And a lot of times, the only times you would see someone depicted as wearing it in Egypt would be someone who's immortal, because the circle, once again, means internal life. So when you see a pharaoh holding an Ankh, it basically, he's saying to everyone, I'm an immortal. And that's basically why they would have it. But something that's very interesting that you must know is each deity or god had their own type of Ankh. So when you have someone like like Osiris, he had an Ankh that would help him specifically work with help making plants grow. If you have an Ankh associated with the moon, that would help with teleportation. If you had an Ankh associated with Tahuti, that would help with high magic or alchemy. And there's different types of Ankhs for different deities, which is very powerful. And usually what happens is every deity, every god would have their own lodge or their own school, where their school would make these Ankhs and then give it to their students or to their friends. And basically that's where these Ankhs would come from, is come from these lodges or these schools. Now in today's time, the reason why a lot of us have Ankhs but they're not really working correctly is because we're not really learning how to work or pull into these energies. So a lot of times, a lot of people would have Ankhs and then it's not really being active. And what happens is you got to learn how to work with energy and the currents of energy and how to pull them into you, and then understand exactly what they're for, so therefore it can become more activated. So that's basically my quick overview on Kemet, a very magical system. They're very sensitive to energy. A lot of their rituals were associated with the different types of elements and keeping things aligned to a certain degree. That's exactly what the pyramids were for. It would help them connect with the higher consciousness of the cosmos and Earth. It also helped with the pharaohs and his passing over, which they had different compounds for the royalty and the queen. Obviously, the Ankh, which would always symbolic of immortality, and so forth. If you always see someone holding an Ankh, it was telling the world that that person is immortal and therefore has access to that immortal knowledge and wisdom and so forth. So that's my quick video. I hope you guys like it, and I'll see you in my next.